They said it never existed, but I remembered every word. What if your own family looked you in the eye and told you something you knew was a lie? I was sitting in my aunt's living room in Wichita, Kansas, clutching a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. My cousin Jenna had just looked me dead in the face and said, "Kayla, I don't think there was ever another will." My heart dropped, because there was. I had seen it. I had even helped my grandmother type it up years ago when she asked for my help updating her estate plans. I remembered the wording. I remembered how specific she'd been about what she wanted each of us to have. And I remembered her saying, "Kayla, if anything happens, you're the only one I trust." But now? Grandma had passed, and somehow everyone was acting like that version of the will had never existed. Instead, there was a new will, mysteriously discovered by my Uncle Don, naming only him and his children as beneficiaries. My name wasn't on it. Not once. It felt like a punch to the gut. I didn't grow up with money. My dad, Grandma's youngest son, died when I was 10. Mom worked 2 jobs to keep me in school, and Grandma had always been the one who made sure I had what I needed. She paid for my braces. She helped with my college books. She even told me she'd left me her old house and part of her savings to help me start fresh. But now that she was gone, it was like I had been erased. The final will, dated just 6 months before she died, gave everything to Uncle Don. The house, the land, her savings, every last bit. And somehow, nobody thought that was odd? Not even when she'd always said she wanted it split evenly? I started asking questions. That's when things got tense. My Aunt Linda pulled me aside after the gathering and whispered, "Sweetheart, just let it go. Don't stir the pot, it's not worth it." But how could I let it go? How could I let them pretend she didn't love me, that she didn't trust me? Because deep down, I knew the truth. They hadn't forgotten the original will. They had buried it. But what they didn't know was that I hadn't, and I still had a copy. They laughed when I brought it up, until I showed them the copy. "Are you seriously still talking about that old will?" That's what my cousin Mark said, smirking like this was all just some annoying game I refused to quit. We were in the kitchen after Grandma's memorial, everyone trying to act civil while dividing her things like vultures. I had finally worked up the nerve to bring up what no one else wanted to talk about: the first will. I said it calmly. I believe there was an earlier will, one that named me. I remember helping her draft it. Dead silence. Then the scoffs, the looks. Uncle Don didn't even bother hiding his irritation. "Kayla, you were a kid. You probably misunderstood. This is what your grandma really wanted before she passed. I'm sorry you're upset, but it's done." They thought they could gaslight me into doubting my own memory. But I was ready. I took a deep breath and pulled out the folder from my bag. It was an old manila file, a little bent at the corners, with a date scrawled in blue ink on the cover. Inside was a printed draft of Grandma's first will. Signed, witnessed, dated nearly 3 years before the so-called final version Uncle Don had submitted to probate court. Placed it gently on the table. The room went silent again, but this time with tension you could feel in your chest. Mark stopped chewing. My Aunt Linda stared at the paper like it might explode. Uncle Don's face went red. He stood up, towering over me. "Where did you get that?" "I helped her write it," I replied. "She gave me a copy, told me to keep it in case anything ever went wrong." I'll never forget the look in his eyes, like something cracked. That was the first moment I saw fear behind his confidence. "You're not a lawyer," he said. "That won't hold up in court. This was superseded by the most recent version, period." Maybe he was right. Maybe it wouldn't matter legally. But I wasn't just here to win in court. I wanted the truth to be known. And if they thought I was going to back down, they didn't know me at all. That night, I scanned the copy and emailed it to a local estate attorney I'd found online. She responded within hours. asking to meet. The next morning, I drove to her office, my hands shaking the whole way. When I told her the story, she didn't roll her eyes, she didn't dismiss me. She leaned forward, looked me straight in the face, and said, "Kayla, if this is legit, you may have a serious case of inheritance fraud on your hands." That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about being forgotten. It was about being cut out on purpose. If you've ever felt like someone tried to erase your worth, drop a comment below and share your experience. Like this video if you're rooting for Kayla. And don't forget to subscribe for the next chapter in her fight for justice. The lawyer called it fraud, and my family started to crack. "Kayla, this isn't just shady, this could be criminal." That's what my attorney, Miss Phillips, said as she flipped through the scanned copy of Grandma's first will, highlighting section after section that directly contradicted the final version Uncle Don had filed in court. She pointed to the signature line, "Same witness name." But the handwriting? Different. If this was swapped out, it wasn't just sloppy, it was intentional. The word intentional hung in the air like a storm cloud. My stomach turned. She asked if I still had the original physical copy. I nodded and handed it to her. She looked it over with the care of someone holding a grenade. "This needs to go to probate court, now," she said. "But be ready. Once we file this, your family's going to come unglued." She wasn't exaggerating. Within 48 hours of the filing, Uncle Don left me a voicemail. His tone wasn't angry, it was panic. "Kayla, we need to talk. There's been a misunderstanding. Maybe we can settle this privately?" I didn't respond. Then I started getting texts from cousins I hadn't heard from in years, some fake, concerned, others more aggressive. Jenna even sent one that said, "Are you seriously trying to sue your own family over a few $1,000s? Grandma wouldn't want this." A few thousand? They had no idea that Grandma's house was fully paid off and sitting on nearly an acre of land just outside Wichita. Her savings weren't just coins in a jar either. She'd been frugal her whole life. She had over $200,000, 0 cents, in the bank. They weren't just trying to erase me from her memory. They're trying to steal everything she ever promised me. But now the court was involved, and Uncle Don couldn't hide behind fake smiles and half-truths anymore. The probate judge put a temporary freeze on the estate distribution. That meant no one could sell the house, withdraw funds, or touch a single cent until things were sorted. That's when the rumors started flying. I heard from a neighbor that Uncle Don was blaming me, saying I pressured Grandma into writing a will years ago, that I was manipulating her when she was vulnerable. That one cut deep. Because if there's one thing I'd never do, it's betray her. She raised me like her own after my dad died. We baked pies together every Sunday. She taught me how to sew. She told me stories about her childhood in Oklahoma, about surviving the Dust Bowl, about strength and perseverance. She was the reason I became the woman I am. So if fighting for her wishes made me the bad guy in their eyes, so be it. They forgot one thing. Emails don't disappear. You know what they say, paper trails don't lie. A week after the court put a freeze on the estate, Ms. Phillips called me in for a meeting. I thought it would just be a strategy update. Instead, she looked at me with a strange smile and said, "We have something." Then she turned her screen toward me and opened an email. It was part of a subpoenaed exchange between Uncle Don and an estate planner he'd used. The subject line, "Need this to look official, no questions." Inside the email, Don had asked the planner to draft a new version of Grandma's will. The planner responded, asking if there had already been a will filed or documented. Still replied, "There was an old draft, but it's outdated. She won't be needing that one anymore." I froze. The date on that message? 4 weeks before Grandma died. Not only did he intentionally leave out the prior will, he was actively working to replace it. And the most damning part? The tone. No mention of Grandma's wishes, no legal consultation, just cold, calculated planning to control everything. Miss Phillips leaned back in her chair. "This changes everything. We're filing a motion to request full estate communications and launch an inquiry into possible will tampering. I should have felt relief, but honestly, I felt sick. He wasn't just trying to leave me out. He was trying to rewrite history. The fallout was instant. Uncle Don's lawyer tried to pull the panic move, suggesting a quiet settlement before things got messy. He offered me $15,000 0 cents and said, "It's more than fair for someone who wasn't in the final version." I laughed. That house alone was worth $160,000 0 cents, and I wasn't just fighting for money, I was fighting for truth. For Grandma. For every moment she made me feel like I mattered. So I rejected it. When word got out that I'd refused the offer, things turned nuclear. Jenna posted on Facebook accusing me of tearing the family apart for greed. My Aunt Linda called and begged me to stop, said Grandma wouldn't want this dragged through the courts. But the truth is, Grandma wouldn't want to be erased. And that's exactly what they were trying to do. Erase the version of her who loved me like a daughter, who trusted me to hold on to her legacy. I wasn't going to let that happen. And I definitely wasn't going to be bullied into silence. Have you ever had someone rewrite the truth to suit their version of the story? Share it below. Like if you believe in standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. Subscribe so you don't miss the next twist in this story. In the sewing room, I found what they missed. Sometimes the truth hides in the quietest places. After everything, the court freeze, the email discovery, the insults on social media, I needed space. So I drove out to Grandma's house one last time, just to sit in the driveway and remember. But something pulled me toward the house. I still had a key. Technically, the estate was frozen, so no one could say I wasn't allowed in. So I let myself in, walked past the half-empty kitchen, and found myself standing in the room I hadn't been able to go near since the funeral. Her sewing room. Grandma used to say this was her thinking place. She'd sit at the little singer machine by the window, stitching dresses, quilts, even doll clothes for me when I was little. I sat down on the creaky stool and took a breath. For a moment, it was like I could still hear the hum of her machine, still feel her presence. And then I noticed the cabinet. It was a small wooden drawer built into the sewing table, one I had forgotten even existed. I opened it slowly. Inside was a stack of fabric patterns, a few spools of thread, and, buried under a faded green handkerchief, a locked metal tin. I stared at it for a moment. The key wasn't in the drawer, but I remembered where she used to keep her extras, tucked inside the lining of a yellow pincushion shaped like a tomato. I found it, opened the tin, and my breath caught in my throat. Inside were letters. Handwritten ones. From Grandma. To me. There were 3 of them, each dated a year apart, the last one written about 2 months before she died. Kayla, I don't know if this will ever reach you, but I've started to worry that Don may try to change things after I'm gone. I've left a copy of my will with you because I trust you more than anyone else. If they ever try to push you out, fight. You deserve what I promised you. I couldn't hold back the tears. She knew. She knew they'd do this. And she left me these letters like breadcrumbs to the truth. So I'd never doubt myself. So I'd never forget that she chose me, that I mattered. I scanned the letters and gave copies to my attorney the next day. Ms. Phillips smiled, almost in disbelief. These are incredibly powerful. This shows intent. It shows she was thinking about you, even in her final days. It changed everything. Because now it wasn't just my word against theirs. It was hers. They took the stand and shattered my uncle's lies. You sure you're ready for this? That's what Miss Phillips asked me as we waited outside the probate courtroom. I nodded, but my hands were trembling. I'd barely slept the night before. Everything was riding on today. Grandma's legacy, my name, the truth. Inside, Uncle Don looked calm. Too calm. Like a man who'd convinced himself the court wouldn't dare believe me over him. Then Ms. Phillips stood and handed a stack of papers to the clerk. Your Honor, were submitting Exhibit C3, handwritten letters from the deceased, expressing concern about undue influence and her desire for the original will to be upheld. You could have heard a pin drop, but the real turning point came after lunch, when Ms. Phillips called a witness I hadn't seen in years. "Your Honor, we'd like to call Mr. Richard Harmon to the stand." I blinked. Richard had been Grandma's longtime neighbor and handyman. He was quiet, polite, the kind of guy who fixed a fence without asking and refused to take money for it. He raised his right hand, swore in, and then cleared his throat. "I was with Marion, that's Kayla's grandmother, often during those last few years. Helped her around the house, ran her errands." "And during that time, did she ever mention a will?" Miss Phillips asked. He nodded, many times. She told me she'd written it with Kayla's help. Said she left her house to Kayla, her savings split between Kayla and her son, Dawn. She was very clear about that. "And did she ever mention updating that will later?" Richard shook his head. "No. In fact, she told me she was worried Dawn might try something shady if he got the chance. Said she kept a copy in a safe place and gave one to Kayla. I thought she was being paranoid, but..." He glanced over at Dawn. "Maybe not." The courtroom shifted. For the first time, I saw Dawn break. His hand clenched the arm of his chair. His jaw tightened. He whispered something to his lawyer, who leaned away slightly. Miss Phillips turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, we believe this is a clear case of will tampering, and we ask for the original will to be recognized as the valid legal document." I felt my heart pounding in my ears. The judge didn't rule that day. He said he needed to review everything, but as we walked out of that courtroom, I didn't feel powerless anymore, because for the first time they were the ones scrambling. They thought I wouldn't have the courage. They thought I wouldn't have proof. They thought I was alone. But I had my grandmother's words. I had Richard's testimony, and I had the truth. Have you ever had someone come through for you when you least expected it? Share it in the comments. Like if you believe quiet people often see the most. Subscribe to follow the final chapters of Kayla's journey. It's far from over. The judge read his decision, and the room exploded. When the probate judge walked in, you could feel the weight in the air, like every breath in that courtroom was being held hostage. I sat on the left with Ms. Phillips, fingers laced so tightly they were turning white. Uncle Don and his lawyer were across the aisle, whispering furiously. My cousins didn't even show. The judge adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and began. "I've reviewed the evidence submitted, both versions of the will, the email communications, the letters from the decedent, and witness testimony. It is the court's determination," my heart thudded, "that the earlier will, drafted and signed with 2 witnesses 3 years prior to Miss Marion Collins' passing, reflects her true intent." I blinked. Did I just hear that right? He continued, "There is insufficient evidence to prove that the later will was drafted by the decedent with full knowledge and consent. Furthermore, the timing, language used in the emails, and the contents of the handwritten letters strongly suggest attempts to suppress the original will." And just like that, everything changed. The judge ordered the original will to be honored. Grandma's house was legally mine. The savings would be split between Uncle Don and me, just like she wanted. And most importantly, her intentions were made clear and public. Then came the fallout. Uncle Don stood up, red-faced and shaking, and muttered, "This is ridiculous. She didn't know what she was doing back then." The judge interrupted him sharply. "Mr. Collins, you are dangerously close to contempt. The matter is settled." Outside the courtroom, he tried one last time. "Kayla, you think you've won. All you did was divide this family." I didn't respond, because in that moment, I finally understood something. This family was divided the moment they decided I wasn't worth honoring her wishes for. The people who truly loved Grandma wouldn't have erased me. They wouldn't have lied or hidden documents or sent me silence wrapped in passive aggression. No, the people who mattered, like Grandma, like Richard, even Ms. Phillips, stood for something more important than appearances. They stood for truth. As I drove home to the little brick house that was now legally mine, I passed all the familiar landmarks. Grandma's church, the diner she loved, the tree-lined back road she used to take to avoid traffic. And I felt her with me, not just in the legal victory, but in the quiet, in the dignity, in the way I stood up for both of us. I lost a family, but I found myself. When the dust settled, I walked into Grandma's house not as a guest, but as the owner. It was surreal. The couch still had the same floral pattern. Her teacups still hung neatly on the kitchen rack. The scent of lavender and old wood still lingered, like she had just left the room. But everything else had changed, including me. The court ruling gave me the house, a fair share of the savings, and most importantly, peace of mind. But peace didn't come easy. The family I grew up around, the ones who celebrated holidays under this roof, had turned their backs the second money got involved. And they never came back. No congratulations, no apologies, just silence. I grieved that. Not just the betrayal, but the fantasy of who I thought they were. I used to think family meant unconditional support, that blood automatically meant love. But now I know it doesn't. Love is shown in actions, not last names. And my grandma showed me more love in one handwritten letter than most of them had in my entire adult life. So I made a choice. I didn't sell the house. I renovated it. I painted the walls a soft sage green, Grandma's favorite. I kept her sewing machine in the corner, cleaned it up, and placed the framed copy of her original will above it as a reminder of her voice. Her real voice, that they tried to silence. And I started something new. I opened the front room as a small quilting and craft space, just like Grandma used to dream about. I invited local women, some young, some retired, to come sew, talk, drink tea, and build something together. Something honest. Something healing. And slowly the house filled again, not with people who shared my blood, but with people who shared my values. Kindness, honesty, respect. Sometimes I still get messages from old relatives. Vague jabs, passive-aggressive questions like, "Still living in Grandma's house?" Or, "You should really let go of all that drama." But the truth is, I have let go. I let go of the need for their approval. I let go of the version of me who stayed quiet to keep the peace. I let go of the guilt for fighting for what was rightfully mine. And in letting go, I finally found space to build a life I'm proud of. A life Grandma would be proud of. Thank you for following my journey. If you've ever had to rebuild from family betrayal, know you are not alone. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my shoes? Like this video if you believe in choosing peace over toxic people. And don't forget to subscribe for more real stories of strength, justice, and rising from the ashes. This was my story. I was cut out. I fought back. I won. And most importantly, I healed.